The RMS Titanic was a British ocean liner that sank on the 15th day of April in 1912 after striking an iceberg on the ship's maiden voyage from Southampton, England to New York City. The Titanic, operated by the White Star Line, and of the estimated 2,224 passengers and crew aboard, approximately 1,500 died, making the incident the deadliest sinking of a single ship at the time. The Titanic carried some of the wealthiest and famous people in the world, as well as hundreds of emigrants from the British Isles, Scandinavia, and elsewhere in Europe who were seeking a new life in the United States and Canada. However, often overlooked are the many famous individuals that had tickets for the Titanic but for various reasons did not make it aboard. Milton Hershey, the American chocolatier, businessman, philanthropist and the founder of Hershey's, sent the White Star Line a $300 check to reserve a spot on the Titanic, but he ended up sailing home on the SS America instead. In 1912, Milton Hershey and his wife Kitty were booked to travel on the maiden voyage of the British luxury liner RMS Titanic. However, they canceled their reservations at the last minute due to business matters requiring Hershey's attention. The cancellation is often incorrectly attributed to Kitty Hershey falling ill, but by this time, she had been ill for several years. Instead, they booked passage to New York on the German luxury liner SS America. The former Hershey Museum displayed a copy of the check Milton Hershey wrote to the White Star Line as a deposit for a first-class stateroom on the Titanic. This copy is now located in the archives of the Hershey Story Museum, which replaced the original Hershey Museum in 2009. John Pierpont Morgan, better known as J.P. Morgan, was an American financier and investment banker who dominated corporate finance during the late 19th and early 20th century. As the head of the banking firm that ultimately became known as J.P. Morgan & Company, he was a driving personal force behind the wave of industrial consolidations in the United States at that time. Over the course of his career on Wall Street, Morgan spearheaded the formation of several prominent multinational corporations including U.S. Steel, International Harvester, and General Electric. He and his partners also held controlling interests in numerous other American businesses including Aetna, Western Union, the Pullman Car Company, and numerous railroads. Through his holdings, Morgan exercised enormous influence over capital markets in the United States. During the Panic of 1907, he organized a coalition of financiers that saved the American monetary system from collapse. Morgan's dedication to efficiency and modernization helped transform the shape of the American economy. Adrian Wooldridge characterized Morgan as America's greatest banker. In 1902, J.P. Morgan & Company financed the formation of International Mercantile Marine Company, an Atlantic shipping company which absorbed several major American and British lines, in a failed attempt to monopolize the shipping trade. Morgan had booked a luxury suite with private promenade deck on the RMS Titanic and scheduled to sail on the ill-fated maiden voyage of the ship, which was owned by an International Mercantile Marine Company subsidiary, White Star Line. However, Morgan's plans to travel on the Titanic were later changed. The ship's famous sinking was a financial disaster for International Mercantile Marine Company. Analysis of financial records shows that the company was over-leveraged and suffered from inadequate cash flow, causing it to default on bond interest payments. Monetary losses amount to nothing in life, Morgan told a New York Times reporter after the sinking. It is the loss of life that counts. It is that frightful death. Guglielmo Marconi was an Italian inventor and electrical engineer, known for his creation of a practical radio wave-based wireless telegraph system. This led to Marconi being credited as the inventor of radio, and he shared the 1909 Nobel Prize in Physics with Carl Ferdinand Braun in recognition of their contributions to the development of wireless telegraphy. Marconi was also an entrepreneur, businessman, and founder of the Wireless Telegraph and Signal Company in the United Kingdom in 1897, which later became the Marconi Company. Marconi was also considered a hero after the sinking of the Titanic because his invention, the wireless radio, helped ships in the surrounding area find where to look for the lifeboats. Marconi's daughter Degna wrote in her 1926 book, My Father, Marconi, that he was offered a free ticket aboard the Titanic. But because his stenographer got seasick, Marconi opted to sail to the United States on the Lusitania because he trusted that ship's stenographer more than Titanic's, Degner wrote. Henry Clay Frick missed the sailing of the Titanic because his wife sprained her ankle in Italy and needed to be hospitalized. Frick was an American industrialist, financier, and art patron. He founded the H.C. Frick and Company Coke Manufacturing Company, was chairman of the Carnegie Steel Company and played a major role in the formation of the giant U.S. steel manufacturing concern. He had extensive real estate holdings in Pittsburgh and throughout the state of Pennsylvania. He later built the neoclassical Frick Mansion in Manhattan, and upon his death donated his extensive collection of old master paintings and fine furniture to create the celebrated Frick Collection and Art Museum. Frick and his wife booked the suite first, and then Mrs. Frick sprained her ankle while they were in Europe buying art, so they stayed behind to get medical attention, the historian Melanie Lynn Gutowski told CBS News Pittsburgh in 2012. The suite that they booked was some kind of savior suite in a way, she continued. Everybody who booked it managed to survive either by not being on the ship or jumping into a lifeboat at the last minute. Eventually, the tickets made their way to J. Bruce Ismay, the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line. Controversially, he was one of the few men who made their way onto a lifeboat and survived. He was criticized for this for the rest of his life. Alfred Gwynne Vanderbilt was an American businessman and member of the Vanderbilt family. He canceled his ticket on the Titanic at the last minute. Vanderbilt was known to be a good judge of real estate values and projected several important enterprises. On the site of the former residence of the Vanderbilt family and on several adjacent plots, he built the Vanderbilt Hotel at Park Avenue and 34th Street in New York City. Among Vanderbilt's many holdings were positions in the New York Central Railroad, Beach Creek Railroad, Lake Shore and Michigan Southern Railway, Michigan Central Railroad and Pittsburgh and Lake Erie Railroad as well as the Pullman Company. Unfortunately, his good fortune in avoiding the sinking of the Titanic did not last. Just a few years later, he was aboard the Lusitania, a British ocean liner that was sunk by German U-boats in 1915. He was one of the 1,200 passengers who did not survive the attack. The American journalist Theodore Dreiser was an American novelist and journalist of the naturalist school. His novels often featured main characters who succeeded at their objectives despite a lack of a firm moral code, and literary situations that more closely resemble studies of nature than tales of choice and agency. Dreiser's best-known novels include Sister Carrie and An American Tragedy. Dreiser claimed that he wanted to sail home with the rich and powerful people aboard the Titanic to get a peek at how the other half lived, but he was persuaded by his publisher to sail home on the Kronland, a cheaper ship, 2 days before Titanic sank. Dreiser wrote about his brush with disaster in a chapter of his 1913 memoir, A Traveler at 40. The terror of the sea had come swiftly and directly home to all, Dreiser wrote. To think of a ship as immense as the Titanic, new and bright, sinking in endless fathoms of water. And the 2,000 passengers routed like rats from their berths only to float helplessly in miles of water, praying and crying. John Mott was an evangelist and long-serving leader of the Young Men's Christian Association or YMCA and the World Student Christian Federation. He received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1946 for his work in establishing and strengthening international Protestant Christian student organizations that work to promote peace. Intimately involved in the formation of the World Council of Churches in 1948, that body elected him as a lifelong honorary president. He helped found the World Student Christian Federation in 1895, the 1910 World Missionary Conference and the World Council of Churches in 1948. His best-known book, The Evangelization of the World in This Generation, became a missionary slogan in the early 20th century. Mott decided to skip traveling on the Titanic and opted for the Lapland instead. Mott reportedly said, "The good Lord must have more work for us to do upon hearing about the sinking." There were other famous individuals who had tickets to sail the Titanic in the future, had it not sunk. James Cash Penney, better known as J.C. Penney, was a merchant who established one of the largest chains of department stores in the United States. Penney was set to sail on the Titanic's second voyage from England to the United States. Frank Seiberling, also known as F.A. Seiberling, was an American innovator and entrepreneur best known for co-founding the Goodyear Tire and Rubber Company in 1898 and the Seiberling Rubber Company in 1921. He also built Stan Highwet Hall, a Tudor Revival mansion, now a National Historic Landmark and Historic House Museum in Akron, Ohio. The Akron Beacon Journal reported that Seiberling and his wife frequently traveled to England and were huge admirers of English architecture. But one of their trips was postponed when the RMS Titanic sank. So was John Alden Dix, an American businessman and politician who served as 38th Governor of New York from January 1911 to January 1913. Smithsonian Magazine reported that Dix was on the passenger list of the Titanic's return trip to England. Henry Adams was an American historian and a member of the Adams political family, descended from 2 U.S. presidents. As a young Harvard graduate, he served as secretary to his father, Charles Francis Adams, Abraham Lincoln's ambassador to the United Kingdom. After the American Civil War, he became a political journalist who entertained America's foremost intellectuals at his homes in Washington and Boston. During his lifetime, he was best known for the History of the United States of America 1801 to 1817, a 9-volume work, praised for its literary style, command of the documentary evidence, and deep knowledge of the period and its major figures. His posthumously published memoir, The Education of Henry Adams, won the Pulitzer Prize and went on to be named by the Modern Library as the best English-language nonfiction book of the 20th century. Adams was also booked on the Titanic's return trip to England. "My ship, the Titanic, is on her way," Adams wrote in a letter in April of 1912, "and unless she drops me somewhere else, I should get to Cherbourg in a fortnight." As history tells, Adams was never able to board the ship and was forced to book passage elsewhere. The Titanic's sinking has become a cultural phenomenon, commemorated by artists, filmmakers, writers, composers, musicians and dancers from the time immediately after the sinking to the present day. On the first day of September 1985, an expedition led by Robert Ballard found the wreck of Titanic, and the ship's rediscovery led to an explosion of interest in Titanic's story. Numerous expeditions have been launched to film the wreck and, controversially, to salvage objects from the debris field. The first major exhibition of recovered artifacts was held at London's National Maritime Museum in 1994. The disaster has also inspired numerous films. In 1997, James Cameron's film Titanic became the first film ever to earn more than $1 billion at the box office, the second film to win 11 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, and the film's soundtrack became the best-selling soundtrack recording of all time.